Welcome to the Close to Home podcast. We are now in 2020, and with the new year, I thought it would be really important to talk about something that is changing in the real estate market. You may have heard about it, but maybe not, because it hasn't gotten that much attention unless you're in a much higher price point and you own an asset in that price point. It won't affect you as greatly, but it's really important to understand. And that's why today we are going to talk about the Real Estate Excise Tax, also known as the REET. But the Real Estate Excise Tax is a part of the closing costs when you go to sell your home. It's typically paid by the seller. So it's one of those additional payments in the payment of selling your home, or the cost of selling your home, that not everyone knows about or talks about, but it is part of that closing cost that the seller has to pay, in addition to paying the real estate agents who facilitate the transaction, as well as any other escrow or title fees that the seller might have to pay. But the real estate excise tax is something that sellers have to pay, and it's changing. So the way that it is billed, or rather, not the way that it's billed, the way that it is calculated is changing in 2020 for King County. So what I thought I'd do first, just to set the groundwork for this show, is talk a little bit about the history of the real estate excise tax, so that you have a little bit of context about what it is and where it came from. So it started back in 1951. The excise tax was first levied in the state of Washington by individual counties at a flat rate of 1% of the sale price. Almost all of this went to enriching school districts. So it was a tax that people paid in 1951, about 1% of the sale price, and it went to enriching the school districts. Now, in 1978, Washington State ruled that funding for public is a state and not a county responsibility. So in 1981, the excise tax fell into the jurisdiction and decision-making of the state of Washington. So it was no longer a county decision, which started in 1978 and then took effect in 1981. So by 1982, the excise tax increased to 1.07% of the sales price, taking pressure off of other state tax increases happening at that time. So this was one way that the state was gathering taxes when people went to sell their homes. Then in 1987, the legislature repealed the conveyance tax and raised the rate of the real estate excise tax from 1.07% to 1.28%. So they raised it a little bit. An additional real estate excise tax of 0.06% was temporarily imposed to provide funding for state acquisition of conservation lands for a rate of 1.34%. So there were quite a few changes in 1987. And then in 1989, the excise tax was reduced back to a flat rate of 1.28%. And it has remained at 1.28% until today in 2020, when it is changing. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen with the real estate excise tax in Washington? So by the way it's mostly reported, the excise tax will be increased in a way to improve and modernize our state's tax system and distribution of the funds. A breakdown of how exactly the tax revenue will be distributed is this. 1.7% must be deposited in the Public Works Assistance account. 1.4% will be deposited in the City County Assistance account. 79.4% will be deposited in the general fund, and the remaining amount must be deposited in the Education Legacy Trust. In July of 2023 and for the time after that, revenue distributions to the Public Works Assistance account will increase to 5.2%. So this is as reported from the Washington State Legislature final bill report. And so you can see that these funds are divided up based on where they're going. And so that's how the excise tax will be distributed. But what is going to be the actual change to the excise tax? Well, there are a few different changes that are coming. So for homes that sell under $500,000, there will be a state tax rate of 1.1%. if you sell from $500,000 to $1.5 million, your state tax rate will be 1.28%. So if you're between $500,000 and $1.5 million, nothing is changing for you in the excise tax rate. But once you get above $1.5 million to $3 million, the excise tax rate will be 2.75%. So we'll go up over 1%. And if you're above $3 million in sales price, you'll have a 3% state tax rate. So for those selling under $500,000, it actually lowers the state tax rate from 1.28% to 1.1. The current 1.28% remains for homes between $500,000 and $1.5 million, and houses selling between $1.5 million and $3 million will have an increase to 2.7%, and houses going for more than $3 million would have a 3% state tax rate. So why is this so important? Well, this is important for sellers who are thinking about selling their home because the cost of selling is going to go up a little bit, especially if you're above the 1.5 million price point. You're going to see an increase in your cost to sell. Now, for those below the 500,000 price point, the cost to sell is actually going to go down a bit. So perhaps this could drive a little bit of sales based on where you're at in these different brackets. So maybe people above 1.5 million might want to sell quicker, or may have wanted to sell last year before this took effect. Now that we're in 2020, it's probably not going to be as impactful because it will impact everyone across the board in those certain price brackets. But it may drive people under 500,000 to make a decision quicker about selling their homes because it actually costs a little bit less than it did in 2019 to sell. So the excise tax, while it's not always talked about, is very important to you as a seller to think about when you're thinking about selling your home, because it could very well impact exactly how much you have to pay for the cost of selling your home. So that's the excise tax for you, and that's how it's going to change in 2020. I hope you found this useful. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to our podcast here close to home. We'd love to have you tune in. And you can also find our videos on YouTube where you can see the full video of this podcast. So until next time, thanks so much for tuning in and have a great day.